It's easier, someone once said, to imagine the end of the world than it is the end of capitalism.
But it's clear that where we can make systems of this complexity, cultural systems, economic systems, machines of this complexity, surely we could make a world that could first meet those needs I described that everyone should have, and then perhaps meet needs that people have only dreamed of, like the need for some autonomy and freedom. The need for that little space up there, the I part, to expand a little bit. Just a little. Just a little. Just a little.
The socialism that could engage with the yearnings and dreamings
in Miles Davis music.
An aesthetic dimension.
Radically incompatible with everyday life under capitalism.
Hey, hi, listeners. Welcome to the Acid Left podcast. We have with us today Ben Burgis, author of Give Them an Argument, Logic for the Left, out in May 2019 from Zero Books, and author of the forthcoming Cancelling Comedians While the World Burns, a critique of the contemporary left, out in April, again from Zero Books. He's a regular contributor to Jacobin Magazine and also has his own YouTube channel, Ben Burgis, Give Them an Argument. So we've got Ben here today, and we want to kind of like cover some stuff relevant to our aims as the Acid Left, which kind of include broadly a kind of melding of creative and I'd say semi-spiritual, but it's kind of like a kind of a weird term, but okay, semi-spiritual and psychological aspects with kind of left aims. So we're going to speak about a little bit of that and how that might relate to Ben's specific focus on logic and on the future direction of the left. But we're also here 2 days after the darkest recesses of the internet burst onto the political stage at the Capitol in the USA. And I think it's kind of interesting how that panned out and how it really did look like kind of like the kind of the kind of motliest bunch of QAnon disaffected soldiers and alt-righters just kind of like, bundled into the Capitol and then just made some great selfie shots. So it's kind of bizarre. They seem to be really leading in this almost carnivalesque form of protest, particularly online, and it upsets me a little bit because it's almost like they're doing what the acid left or acid communism should be doing, but I don't by that mean like literally like attacking people or getting shot. And then that is kind of very sad that people have been kind of persuaded to go and fight for this kind of heinous form of right-wing politics, and then in some cases lost their lives. It's very unclear how many people died really from the protests or the violence, and how many people just happened to have their heart attacks or whatever, whilst they were there. But we know certainly there is this one Babbitt, is it Ashley Babbitt, who was shot. But it's just kind of the images we've been seeing, the self-styled shaman of QAnon, the people in the offices of various senators, with their feet up on the tables. I mean, it all looks kind of very cool, but also just like, it was kind of shocking. It was kind of psychedelic in a way. It really was like the alt-right exploding, onto the kind of real political stage. So, I mean, in that light, I want to kind of think a little bit about how does the left counter that, but how do they counter just generally what's happening, I suppose, more importantly, with the rise of the right and with Trumpism, which obviously isn't going anywhere. I suppose we can start with that, actually. So Ben, I mean, how did you take what happened the other day, a couple of days ago? What's your kind of view of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a shocking like escalation. It's certainly not anything I think we could have imagined happening in 2015. I mean, in a way, I think that it reminds me, like, I think the way that some people are getting it wrong reminds me of the way that I thought that some people were getting it wrong over the summer when there was all the post George Floyd unrest, which is to say that in that case, you had a lot of the optics of a revolution. People burned down the police station in Minneapolis. And so that's the kind of thing that you would expect to see in that sort of circumstance, like the Arab Spring in Cairo in 2011 or whatever. But there's no actual but the actual state was totally secure, right? Like there was never, it never rose to the level where there was any threat to that. It just looked like it. And I think in that in kind of the same way, but even more so because the post George Floyd unrest, I mean, those were some of the biggest, protests and riots, in several decades, if not ever. Like that was, even though it didn't rise to the level of being an, insurrectionary threat to the state by any stretch of the imagination, it was still a very, very, very big deal. And this, I don't want to say it's not a big deal. Like I said, I think it's a shocking escalation. But it's also important to remember that we're not talking about very many people. Like the initial protest, was pretty big, but I think the actual number of people storming the Capitol, at least the estimates I've seen, was like 1,000 people, maybe a couple thousand people were in there. And so I think that the most shocking thing about it isn't really that it happened. Like if there had just been a right-wing riot that was near the Capitol, that would have been a big news item, but I don't think it's one that anyone would have experienced as apocalyptic. The thing that makes it so shocking is that the Capitol cops let it happen, and whoever it was, and I think we're still a little fog of war on this, who told the National Guard to stand down initially, right? Let it happen, because I think to stop it, they wouldn't have really had to kill anybody. I mean, the one person the cops did kill. I think that was like a weird overreaction. It was the flip side of the overall weird underreaction that having let a mob of people, many of them armed, some of whom appeared to be interested in taking hostages. There were literally, there's a picture that's gone around a lot of somebody with a handful of, zip ties along with their gun. Having let those people into the Capitol in the first place, which is crazy, then then when they saw somebody, even an unarmed member of the group, trying to smash into the inner sanctum, then they panicked and shot her. But I think to stop it, I mean, you wouldn't have really liked to stop 1,000 or 2,000 people from storming the Capitol. I mean, there are probably 2,000 cops at the Capitol. Just to stop that, you wouldn't have had to kill anybody. You would have just had to show about the level of force that's routinely shown by Capitol cops to crack down on like Code Pink protests and disabled veterans doing sit-ins at Mitch McConnell's office over Medicaid cuts. So I think that's really the thing that makes it, like, obviously the thing itself was very strange. It had that like it had this sort of absurdist kind of festival, aspect that I think riots actually very often do have, maybe a little bit more so with the, guy dressed up as a buffalo shaman or whatever that was supposed to be. And you had, and I think, and look, there are parts of that like, even knowing that like, some of these people are like borderline fascists and that the point of the whole thing is to overturn a democratic election. I mean, some of the actual imagery, I mean, I think, like, my instinctive reaction to seeing people sitting at the desks of powerful officials and taking souvenirs and stuff, like there's some part of it, it's like, yeah, like instinctively I think it's kind of cool, right? It's like it's sort of a heartwarming sight until you remember who these people are.
Yeah, I think, well, kind of cool, but also, yeah, there's kind of an incendiary feeling about the images, but then if you compare that to the actual risk involved in terms of the threat to American democracy, I mean, there's a big gulf between the two. There is no real threat. There was no real threat to American democracy, but there is, there are these images which look very much like the images of protests past, the ones that stay in history books, now will be on the internet, indefinitely, and which can inspire people. And I think the left have problems, having these images. We have like images of Corbyn and Sanders and whatnot, and then Black Lives Matter, which I think can be very powerful, obviously. But there's something about this, like being in the Capitol, which I think will inspire people for a long time. And that's I suppose what kind of worries me, but also it just kind of like disappoints me that the left don't seem to be able to come up with anything really incendiary on the same level in terms of like the image war.
It's interesting because I think we're gonna, like, the next couple weeks are really gonna see how that plays out. I felt pretty disturbed by it initially because one of the things I really follow is right-wing narratives, and especially like far right and conspiracy narratives. I knew they were planning this. Like it's been all over, their message boards for weeks. But I think, now that we see the big reaction is the political class move away from supporting Trump, I think he overplayed his cards too fast. I think what he wanted was a huge show of force on the streets on the 6th, and then try to something closer to this on the 20th. After gaining more support from actual, congressmen, because there was such a show on the streets. If he could have moved that 140 so support to 180, might have had more lasting power to claim illegitimacy. But now you see people walking back. So I don't think you're going to see something like this on the 20th, because DC is probably going to be a police state on the 20th.
Yeah, well, I think that last part's definitely right. And I do agree that he overplayed his hand. Not that I think there's really any scenario where this could have led to the election result actually being overturned and him staying in power. I think that like all roads lead to Biden, being inaugurated on the 20th, which is an important like bit of perspective to keep in mind, that like these guys in a lot of ways actually really what the whole thing showed, I think, is not that Trump is like a Mussolini on the verge of happening, but that he's a spectacularly weak president. That he that the mob of wannabe insurrectionists he was able to call up was so small, that that Mitch McConnell, his own vice president, his own defense secretary, none of these people were remotely on board, and were obviously pretty horrified. And he really overplayed his hand with the kind of larger forces in society that somebody would need to actually become like a like a successful authoritarian leader. The National Association of Manufacturers, which loved Trump until very recently, biggest big business group in the country, called for Mike Pence to invoke the 25th Amendment to remove him 2 weeks early. I think the Wall Street Journal said that. So I think really in a lot of ways, what maybe was intended as a show of strength ended up being a show of weakness. And I guess part of the reason I think that that's worth emphasizing is that I think some people even on the left, certainly liberals, but I think even some people on the left, by sort of taking it as what it seemed to be, as this sort of the same way that for the far right, it could be useful in terms of that image war that Mike is talking about. I think for a lot of people, a lot of progressives and leftists, who were always on the page of Trump is this like imminent fascist threat to the existence of bourgeois democracy in the United States. If you believe that narrative, this looks like look, this is really striking evidence that my God, look at what just happened. But then I think that the danger of that is that beyond just this just I think missing what's really going on is that I think that makes people not attuned to what the greater danger is in reality, right? Like what happened was a right-wing riot. which was, very ugly and disgusting, obviously. And the most objectively shocking part is that the rioters were allowed to riot at the Capitol rather than being kept away from it. But there was never any possibility that this was going to lead to, whatever, the election, being overturned, Donald Trump being able to stay president, anything like that. And I think that, but what I think is now like the big danger is that it's going to be used as the basis for a new round of repressive laws. Joe Biden has already said that a major priority is to pass a new law on domestic terrorism, and that's that's actually like something that's going to happen from people with real power, not a couple of thousand QAnon lunatics who've lost the last remaining shred of touch with reality. And I think that if that does happen, there is a 110% chance that that's going to be used against the left. That if there's anything that happens that declares, that classifies, like QAnon stuff as like, terrorist incitement, is also going to be applied to anybody who can, be associated with, Antifa, say. So I think that's the bigger danger I'd be worried about right now.
Yeah,
that's
that
true.
Is a danger,
QAnon's not a small percentage of people, though. That's a fairly hefty portion. There's more QAnoners than there are Antifa people by far.
Yeah,
sure.
I was just going to say that I think I think actually, yeah, what Ben said is right. And of course, the left generally are only asking for things that are in fact quite reasonable. I say that as a leftist, so of course, there's a risk that's just my bias. But they're asking like, can people of color be treated as white people?
Right.
But this kind of demand can be stamped out through new law, or at least the protest in favor of these demands.
Can I have healthcare, please?
But at the same time, you're bringing in demands to stop people from rampaging through the Congress, which is already illegal. So I don't think this can really do much to impede that kind of right winger. But I'm seeing also a kind of a problem which is global, which I think America seems to be feeling more acutely now. And this is just like people being really out of touch with reality. As Adam says, QAnon is massive. People aren't grounded in their locality because they're watching the internet, and they're really feeling like the impeding problems are things like, the world being run by a cabal of leftists who are also satanic pedophiles, etc. And maybe their subconscious can't really see that as something that's false, or rather they think it's true, or some of them think this is true, but the subconscious also can't perceive it as a distant threat. It's an immediate threat. This is what they're dealing with in their lives. This really goes down to not having a kind of top-down flow of information. And of course, we really don't want a top-down flow of information, yet I can't really see how we're going to get back control of of narratives as such, without some degree of control of the internet. Or otherwise you need kind of localized leaders, maybe not even geographically localized, but people that everyone can relate to. So everyone has people around who can kind of set things in perspective in their internet bubble, or, near where they live. Any ideas on how we might approach that, especially as, me and Adam, part of the whole thing is like hoping that the openness of the internet might somehow explode reality and start something altogether better. But unfortunately, the openness of the internet seems to just be taking the world down exactly the path we don't want it to go down.
Yeah, it's a tricky question, especially because, to the extent that we do have top-down flow of information, we're not at the top and won't be. And there's no scenario by which we become at the top, that doesn't involve fixing, that problem first. So the people who are at the top are going to be Googles and the Amazons and Facebooks and, YouTubes, these which are, in other words, what I've just named are a few massive oligarchic, corporations, like those, and and then add some big media companies. Those are the people who are on top of the flow of information. And again, this is something, that I really worry about, because, like, even though, I mean, God knows you can make a case, in terms of use and all that stuff. There's still something like very, very weird about this precedent that's being set right now. Like, I guess Twitter's already waffled on it a couple times and flip flop, but like that, Facebook saying, that the president of the United States can't use their platform for the remaining 2 weeks of his term, which, again, even if you think that's justifiable in context, is insane. That like that if they can, if they can deplatform, the highest profile and most politically powerful, human being on the planet, then that's really a pretty astonishing, show of their power over the force of, over the flow of information. So as far as what can be done, about the flow of information, I think, I don't want to minimize, how bad, QAnon is. It's certainly a deep kind of, brain rot. I'm not always sure how seriously to take some of the polling data on this, because like I also think it's a little bit like, back in the 2000s when some totally, like a shockingly large percentage of Democrats, would say in polls that, they thought maybe 9/11 was an inside job. And I think that some of that is just sort of like tribal, like, hey, you get asked a question that's like, that you can interpret as, hey, fuck the other team, yes or no? Yes, right? Like, so I think some of the, my hope is that some of the, some of the polling data on the popularity of QAnon conspiracy theories is can be seen in the same light. But also, look, I'm sure that a lot of it is genuinely popular, but I think that's also a symptom that conspiracy theories, I think, tend to become, like, the breeding ground for them tends to be situations where people feel enormously powerless and alienated from mainstream news sources, and from the establishment more generally. I don't think it's a coincidence that, like Middle Eastern countries that have been, ruled by, various, military dictators, like tend to be places where like 95% of everybody believes some crazy conspiracy theory, since it echoes their sense of reality, that, that, oh, there are powerful forces who are aligned against you, who control everything. And look, even with the QAnon stuff, obviously the details are beyond insane and irrational, but like, I don't know. The Jeffrey Epstein exists, right? The idea that, or existed, the idea that there are, that there are like tons of politicians and rich people, who are secretly pedophiles involved in conspiracies is not actually completely wrong. It's just it's just a way of connecting the dots that's spectacularly and dangerously wrong in all sorts of ways, and inspires people to do all sorts of crazy shit, like what we saw on Wednesday. So it is dangerous, but it doesn't come out of nowhere. All of which, I guess, is just to say that I think it's a symptom that's going to be with us as long as the underlying problem is with us. That not, and whatever. I'm sure it'll be with us to some extent always. I don't think conspiracy theories are going to immediately wither away under socialism, but I think it's going to be rampantly with us as long as the underlying problem problem is with us. It's just one of these things. It's like all like how all complex ecosystems have parasites. Like all failing, dying, power structures are going to have conspiracy theories about them, and so I guess, as alarming as QAnon is, I also think that maybe it's a mistake to focus too much on the conspiracy theories as opposed to, and I realize this is much, much easier said than done. And, and I don't want to pretend I have more answers than I do about how to do it, but, as opposed to being able to, to provide people with a more, with a more grounded, idea of what the real power structures in society are and what can be done about them.
Yeah, I think it's a case of building grassroots structures where people can be made to feel comfortable talking about this stuff, and then maybe be directed towards more sane or healthy ways of viewing, what probably is happening. Like Jake Angeli, the self-styled QAnon shaman, the guy with the horns in the Capitol. There's some footage of him from February last year at a rally where he's saying, he's on camera, I guess, for a news network, and he's saying, like, the governments of the world, they have all these underground facilities and they're researching stuff, and he's talking about military stuff and medical stuff. I mean, he's basically just kind of repeating this point that the governments, and he said particularly Switzerland has lots of places underground, and some countries just have so many. He said you can't go for more than 200 miles in any direction without finding an underground facility, presumably military. And of course, he's probably right. Switzerland, I don't think military, but maybe they have lots of underground vaults. I mean, it's not that weird that people would have underground stuff, and then maybe they would do their military research sometimes underground, or maybe exaggerating the underground element. But what he's ultimately identifying, and he also linked in central banks and the way central banks control governments. These are kind of left-wing problems.
Yeah.
The fact that governments have huge militaries that research stuff, I mean, that's hierarchy. But, applying right-wing answers, and I see this a lot, and this is what Trump has been so good at, is attracting working class who basically are seeing age-old left-wing problems, but making them identify with right-wing solutions. If the left could get into those communities and, get them reading and talking, maybe it's not necessary to read, whatever, show them videos, it's enough to hang out and speak, I guess. Maybe we could get them, turn them onto a left-wing narrative, welfare, healthcare, etc. I mean, Christ knows these are good things. I live in Finland. There's a great welfare system. I can tell you, it's very useful. It makes for a much easier living than when I lived in Italy or the UK. This is probably what people need, but they don't seem to know what they need. I mean, how would you address that? And then, because I'm in Finland, I'm actually also running as a councillor in the upcoming elections in April. So I'm kind of, thinking a little bit about Finnish politics, and I'm always thinking about UK, US politics. I just want to kind of like ask how you see anyway this kind of left-wing vision being achieved in America. Is there any way this can be achieved? Basic provisions of welfare. I'm talking about free education at a tertiary level. I mean, now Biden has a majority everywhere. No, he can basically, I would think, do what he wants, but he doesn't seem to want to do anything.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right. So, I mean, on that last point, I know anybody who's like an annoying centrist who's listening to this will immediately be jumping up and down in their seats saying, no, you can't do anything he wants. What about, Joe Manchin, who's a particularly conservative Democrat in the Senate? And there's some truth to that. It's what was these two victories in Georgia that just happened created the narrowest of Senate majorities. It's 50 votes, so it's a majority because the vice president, Kamala Harris, will be able to break ties in the Senate. But that said, it is still, I think, very welcome news in terms of what you're talking about, because something that I was, really depressed by when the election first happened and it looked like it was going to be a Republican-controlled Senate, was that this is such a golden rationale for Biden to not do anything, that would align with even like the sort of good parts of the platform that he ran on. Because it's so easy to just say, hey, my hands are tied, Republican Senate. And now I think, even though they could still use the Manchin excuse, I think it's a little thinner, it's a little wonkier. I think it's less. I think it's going to have less popular purchase, right? I think it'll convince less people, and which is good, because I think it makes it slightly easier for the left. I mean, this is something I was talking to Megan Day about. She's also a writer for Jacobin. Right after the election, which is that we're gonna, probably there are going to be 1 million articles in the next 2 years in Jacobin along the lines of, hey, Democrats say, like Biden and the Democrats say they can't do X, but here are 3 things they could do if they wanted to, right? So they don't want to, and I'm sure everybody will get sick of writing them, and everybody gets sick of reading them. But but anyway, I think this does make that job slightly easier because there are at least more things that they could do. But look, I mean, I think as far as your larger question goes, yeah, I mean, there is some truth to that that these are people with left-wing problems and right-wing solutions. I mean, this goes all the way back. I mean, this kind of goes back to August Bebel's point in early writing in like the sort of heyday of early German social democracy, even about anti-Semitism as the socialism of fools. That if you sort of have a correct sense that there is an elite power structure that's arrayed against you, it can be easily misdirected in horrifying right-wing directions. And I think you're right to point to the possibility of kind of rallying people around this different kind of platform, about healthcare and all those other good things, to push back against that. And I think there is some potential there. Like, and I think the mistake that people often make when they start thinking about this is that they're unclear about who the target group is. Right. So when we say who could be won over by a left-wing explanation of these same problems, what are we talking about? Right? Are we talking about the most hardcore of the mega hardcore, or are we talking about like the whatever it was, 71 million people who voted for Donald Trump? Because if you're talking about the most hardcore of the hardcore, people actually riding the Capitol, then maybe not, right? I mean, maybe they've already settled, way too decisively on their explanations and their solutions, and maybe there's just not a lot that can be done realistically to win them over. But I sure as hell hope that that's not true of the 71 million people who voted for Trump, because if it is, we're just completely fucked. And I think there is some evidence that we're not completely hosed in that regard. So there are polls showing as many as 46% of people who ordinary people who identify as Republicans support Medicare for all, for example, would support it. And so I think that's something to build on. I mean, I think that the part of what I always understood to be the premise of Bernie Sanders' 2 campaigns for president was that he would have a greater ability to attract people who wouldn't normally vote for Democrats to vote for him in the general election because of the popularity of some of his economic program and the ability of that popularity to reach across certain like culture war divides. There are a lot of people who might vote in culturally conservative but economically hurting parts of the country. There are lots of people who might vote on the basis of cultural values if they're not very excited about anybody's economic platform. But there's a chunk of them, we're not talking about all of them, but a chunk of them who might vote for a Democrat with a better economic, more exciting economic platform, and it's not good enough to just say, you'll be better off, like what the Democrats are saying would be better for you economically than what the Republicans are saying, especially if most people who casually pay attention to the news really don't understand exactly what the Democrats are saying about it. Like in 2016, I mean, I'm an obsessive news junkie, and I vaguely knew that Hillary Clinton was saying that the Affordable Care Act should be improved somehow, but hell, if I could tell you how exactly, I think you had to like go on her website and dig up some like 100-page policy paper to tell you, so what she was campaigning on, and what that amounted to on healthcare was, trust us, we'll figure something out for you. And of course, people have a very well-earned cynicism with that. So I'm not surprised that it didn't have very much crossover appeal. And there are lots of people who might have voted for somebody like Bernie who might just not vote normally. And I understand everything that I'm saying, that there's a lot of received wisdom that it's been disproved either by the way the primary happened or by the fact that we just had a very high turnout election that was also very close, in the first case, the idea is that, not enough, that, the fact that there wasn't some big groundswell of turnout to put Bernie over the top in the primary ballots undermines this theory of elections that I've been talking about. Or the second case, the theory would be that, this shows that non-voters are more conservative than you might think. But I'm not really persuaded by either of those. I know it's been a long answer, but just to quickly hit both of those points. So in the first case, I think that a primary and a general election are very different things. First, because tons of ordinary working class people don't even know when their state's primary is. I was in Nevada canvassing for Bernie, before the primary there, and tons of cab drivers I talked to on the Vegas Strip, they had no idea what the caucus was. Whereas if you turn on a television or a radio at any time during the 2 years before, when the general election is. So they're very different beasts. People who vote in primaries tend to be much more identified with traditional party structures because they're bothering to vote in a party primary than a lot of people who might vote in a general election. And also, it's just not that interesting that some long shot challenger is running in a primary. I think somebody like that actually gaining control of a major party nomination, I think would be much more of an earthquake in terms of its political effects. And in terms of the second one, I think it just misunderstands the point. The point is not that we think, certainly as I ever understood it, it's not that we think that there's some great mass of tens and tens of millions of people with a coherent left-wing worldview out there who aren't voting right now. Right? I certainly don't think that. I never thought that. Rather, the point is that most ordinary people, especially ordinary people who don't bother to vote, are not super political in general. They have other things going on in their lives. They're not they have political impulses. They have political reactions to things, but those impulses and reactions haven't really gelled together into a coherent worldview, which is not a slam on them. They have jobs and families and lives, and politics is a very small part of it. They don't spend enough time thinking about it for it to all gel together that way, and that's totally reasonable. You have to be a little bit weird, to be like us and to think about this stuff all the time. So I think that all of which is just to say that I think that people who have a sort of eclectic combination of political impulses because they don't really think about it all the time, and they haven't really spent a lot of time thinking about how to fit it all together, I think could be attracted by a lot of different candidates, in different ways at different times. And people like that, they could vote for, a Trump or a mainstream Democrat like Biden, or they could vote for Bernie. It depends what the election's about. I think if Bernie Sanders had been the nominee, the election would have been about as close to single issue as partisan elections ever get. I think that if the nominee was Bernie Sanders, who was practically synonymous with Medicare for all, in an election taking place against the backdrop of COVID-19 and millions of people losing their employer health care because they were losing their jobs during the pandemic, then honestly, I think that the American election would have been as much about healthcare as the last British election was about Brexit. Unlike Brexit, which was obviously very unfavorable, terrain for Corbynism, I think that this would have been very favorable, terrain for the left. So, whatever, maybe realize the risk of everything that I'm saying is that, at a certain point, when you're banging this, Bernie would have crushed drum, too far after the fact, you start to feel like one of those Japanese soldiers, on an island somewhere, who doesn't know that World War II was over in 1970, you just feel like you need to move on. But that said, I think that it is potentially true that it would have been much more of a blowout with Bernie.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think there's an issue with narrative, partly that the left just aren't managing to kind of construct a narrative that appeals. And you're saying there's people that maybe aren't super interested in politics, and that's it. Maybe then you need something really kind of striking to break through their bubble, their justifiable bubble, and just kind of like make America great again. Maybe striking, and just Medicare for all isn't, for some reason, it doesn't seem to people to be a heroic struggle. Whereas really the left just struggle, to make a world run for everybody, from each according to their ability to each according to their need. That is an amazing struggle. If you could be the society that made that happen, you would be remembered historically as the greatest society of all time, one imagines, or could be. But people just aren't attracted to that because the story's not really being told. The one thing I want to say is that, one thing about Medicare for all, free tuition fees, these kind of things that you might see in an advanced welfare state, these advanced welfare states aren't capitalist, and this is a weird thing, is that the best thing the left could do in America and the UK is maybe push this, that actually the Nordic countries, did I say aren't capitalist? What did I say? I meant they're not communist. I mean, whatever I said, I meant that these advanced Nordic countries are capitalist. They're not socialist. No one in Finnish politics calls themselves a socialist, even the furthest left party. I'm with the Left Alliance. That actually grew out of the Communist Party historically, but people don't often call themselves communists. One of our parties, the education minister, they just actually passed a law which will make compulsory education finish at 18. So you'll have to do, I don't know what the case is in America, but it'll be compulsory paid education to 18. In the UK, it's 16, but also a free second degree at any point in your life. So a free master's, basically. So, I mean, these are great things, but these are kind of coming on the back of a very pragmatic capitalism that just sees that, your society is going to hold together the best if you look after everyone. And it really seems to work somehow. But then that isn't a great narrative. That's just kind of like, that's quite dull, actually. But it might get around the fear of socialism and communism that people have in the States.
Well, speaking of narratives, Ben, what you were saying, I think rings true, and anecdotally, it seems true to me, because I knew lots of people that were never voters that went to Bernie and then went to Trump, and would have considered going back to Bernie. And I really liked your book, Give Them an Argument. And after I read it, I felt like I, had all these arguments for people. I felt like well armed. But what I found was, when I brought these to people that weren't just Republicans, that were Trumpsters, they tended to backfire on me. Where it seemed really useful was talking with liberals and moderate Republicans. And so what we're really talking about here, what we're kind of skirting around, is this idea of giving new narratives to people. And I think, I'm wondering where you see if you see something beyond logic as helpful in that. Of course, I think you have, we want to stick to the truth, and maybe that's why it's hard for us to build something like QAnon, because it doesn't matter if they stick to the truth. It doesn't matter if it's logical to them. We want that, but we also want to bring something more in there that can direct them away from the harmful narratives into something larger. Maybe that's working, something with closer to what we're doing, with more materialist minded, social democratic and Marxist perspectives. But it also makes me think of when you talked to Zizek recently, and you asked him about his blueprints for the future, the cook shop for communism. So yeah, I was wondering if you could talk about where you see that role in there, something beyond logic for the left.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I mean, I certainly agree, right? So when we talk about logic, which, is, which is a word that has a lot of, connotations for a lot of people in these contexts that, that might be, that might be misleading. So to be clear, all we talk about logic is just like getting the arguments right. That's it, right? That's all we mean. whether those are empirical, sociological, or whatever kind of arguments we're talking about. So yeah, and I certainly agree with you that look, I mean, humans are a narrative species. It's at least as important to get the rhetorical packaging right as the underlying arguments, in terms of persuasion, no doubt whatsoever about that. I mean, I think when I wrote that book, my view was that it is important to be able to to break down arguments and show what's wrong with them, not because that's the only or should even be the primary tool in our arsenal, but just because it's a indispensable tool. So it's something that we need to be able to do, even while understanding that most political persuasion is not going to rise and fall on the use of that tool. That if you want to be of course there are people who are resistant, on the left, even to that, right, on sort of super duper materialist grounds, that it's people don't change their political positions because of the stuff going on the level of ideas, it's all just material circumstances. But my problem with that, beyond, I mean, we can sort of do, we can fight about whether actually, various materialist thinkers really did think all that. But I think the more important point is if they did, they were wrong. They were obviously wrong. That people, if that's what super duper materialism entails, then super duper materialism is just false. Because obviously stuff like this does play a role, and people don't just shift purely on the basis of material conditions. This goes back to Mike's point that the exact same material conditions could be interpreted through all sorts of ideological lenses and lead to very different conclusions. And it's not just a matter of material conditions. Of course, that doesn't mean it's all a matter of arguments by any stretch of the imagination. I think that there are developments in the objective political terrain. There are issues of rhetorical framing. There are all sorts of things, most of which is not taking place at the level of breaking down exactly what's wrong with some argument, that are most of what moves people. I just think that it's an important weakness, and one that I felt like I was in a position to be able to help to provide some tools to correct if we can't also do that. But yeah, look, I think that in terms of those narratives, I am somewhat optimistic, actually, that stuff like Medicare for All could play that role. I'm actually somebody who'd argue that hasn't been decisively tested yet. I think that if Bernie Sanders had been the nominee during a pandemic, I think that might have been like a real test of the ability, of that to galvanize people. And it's also worth remembering that to a large extent, I mean, like the fact that everybody knows who Bernie Sanders is already speaks to the fact that that agenda speaks to a lot of people. When he first announced in 2015 that he was going to run, and he did that, by the way, I think he had like his announcement speech written down on some index cards in his pocket, and he did that to an audience of like a few reporters, I think literally on his lunch break from the Senate. It was barely covered. People who talked about it said that his upper, like his ceiling of support would be like 10% or something. And I think it's actually very clear if you go back and look at the 2016 election that some of the mistakes he even made were that he never thought, like he always thought of himself, he thought of himself as a protest candidate rather than a real candidate until much too late in the process, when he started to realize, oh shit, I could actually win this thing, and started acted accordingly. And I think that speaks to the fact that it's certainly not his personal charisma. It speaks to the fact that what he was talking about, like Medicare for All, the sort of opening up this sense of what's politically possible, actually did speak to lots of people. And I think that the biggest problem is, to go back to our patron saint Mark Fisher, is this kind of deep, capitalist realism, that so it's. The problem is not that, I think that people wouldn't get excited about some of these things if they thought they were going to happen. It's that they don't take seriously the idea that they might happen. Like, I think that the defeats that the left has suffered recently in both the U.S. and the U.K. speak to that. That if people, didn't really take seriously the idea that, like to far too many Democratic voters who, remember, overwhelmingly support Medicare for all. Like, it has majority support in the population as a whole. Some of this depends on how you ask the question, but I think we can be optimistic. It has majority support in the population as a whole, has overwhelming majority support among voters who identify with Democrats. And every single exit poll, on Super Tuesday showed that in almost all of those states that Joe Biden won, the voters, Democratic voters there supported Medicare for all, but they weren't then voting for the Medicare for all candidate. Why not? And you can ask similar questions about the last general election in the UK. I mean, I think of all the possible explanations for the loss, I don't think it's that Jeremy Corbyn's actual program was unpopular with voters. I don't think that the polls bear that out. I think that in both cases, the issue is that people have been so beaten down by neoliberalism that they don't think that anything that sounds like, even though all we're talking about at this point is just social democracy, like Mike says, Finland is not, a post-capitalist society, by any definition. Even though all we're talking about is social democracy, people have been trained to find the idea that we're going to get any big social democratic advances wildly unrealistic. That doesn't mean they wouldn't want it or support it if it happened, but it just sounds like a fantasy. So, if British voters, a certain kind of British voter, who sure might love to renationalize the rails and expand the NHS and all that good stuff, but if they experience the Labour Party platform as a kind of Christmas wish list of things that are never going to happen, they think, okay, look, whether Brexit happens or not, that's real, right? Like that's something that's actually at stake here. So I'm going to vote based on that. And similarly, I think a lot of American, voters in the Democratic primaries, look, I'm, Medicare for all, giving everybody free college, all this stuff sounds great, but whatever, it's probably not going to happen anyway. He probably wouldn't be able to get them done, if he was elected. So that's not going to weigh very heavily with me. What's going to weigh very heavily is this idea of who's going to be the stronger candidate against Donald Trump, where, of course, obviously I disagree. You can go back and read my Jacobin articles writing this, and I still think that if the pandemic hadn't happened, or frankly, even if there had been a second round of checks before the election, that there's a very good chance that Donald Trump would have beaten him. But whatever, voters disagree, right? Voters thought that Joe Biden was a stronger, candidate in the general election against Trump, and they thought whether Trump is still president, and then how COVID's handled because of that, all that stuff, right? That's real, right? Whether this social democratic wish list is going to happen, yeah, whatever, I'll believe it when I see it. So I think our real challenge is to get people to think that it's going to happen, and in a way, I think this also relates to what you were asking about, about when it comes to that part of my conversation with Zizek about his his recipes for the cook shops of the future, right? It's like what I was kind of trying to press him on. Okay, when you talk about communism, like, no, but really, what does that mean? Like, what exactly does that mean? And I think it's kind of a second level version of the same problem that, in the immediate instance with, like, for lack of a better word, normies, the challenge is to get to get a lot of politically disaffected people to even take seriously the idea that we could have social democracy in America.
Yeah. I think we're dealing with a kind of thoroughgoing irrationality, and then people try and kind of respond to that with a kind of supposed rational program like Brexit, which is actually designed to, in reality, it's designed to appeal to people's irrational side. I think in all this, the left needs somehow to come up with the real rationality. I mean, it's kind of highly confusing because what is presented as rational is irrational. So then presenting a rationality in opposition to that means presenting something that is ostensibly irrational, but actually chimes more with what humans really are. I think we are creative beings, and we need a kind of mythos of a sort, and we need a movement a bit like the beatnik or hippie or punk movements, which play on some kind of make believe and kind of dress up aspect. I think this is why this image of the shaman guy in the Capitol is so striking, and I feel a little bit jealous of it, because the left don't have this kind of this thing happening. But to have a kind of mass movement which kind of drives at people's psyches, the kind of the real rationality, the one that needs narratives, the one that leads us to have this kind of grand Marxist narrative, which draws on Judeo-Christian narratives, this idea of inevitable utopia. But how do we have this mass movement if we can't come together? And I think we need to maybe address our own particular kind of corner of the left, which is the left internet. Although I think we're all also kind of to some degree active otherwise. But I kind of see a problem with the left internet. I mean, it's a great thing because it brings people together, and you can kind of feel that you're not alone because you can talk to people across the world who share your ideas. But it's really kind of failing in getting people together on any local level. It's kind of an extension of post-Fordism. So post-Fordism is kind of the breakup of the workplace. So you don't have more than a few workers in any one place making kind of small parts of cars, that kind of end up being sent to the right place so they can be assembled. But you never have enough workers in one place to build a movement. We have that, much bigger now, where most of our comrades are probably scattered across the world. We're in no position to all meet up and have a protest. So, I mean, how do you see that? Because obviously you're kind of doing really well with your own channel. You're someone who's recognized. What do you suggest we do about that in terms of actually building a grassroots in real life movement?
Yeah. So right. I think that, I think this ties into Adam's question about the cook shops, because I think it's all just different. I think a lot of it is, not all of it, I think a lot of it is different iterations, the same problem about, sort of limits of imagination, that, Joe Schmo, who only half pays attention to politics, doesn't take seriously the idea that we could even have social democracy. And most people on who do broadly identify with the left, and I'm not talking about like people who post tanky memes on Twitter or whatever. I mean, I mean most people in the world at large who identify with the left don't really take seriously the idea that we could have anything more than social democracy. Like, I mean, I don't, I like Zizek a lot. I don't want to, I don't want to speak ill of him, but I mean, I think that sort of, I think his reluctance to kind of spell out, what he means by communism, is a symptom of this. And I think actually this goes back to the earlier question nicely, because I think that is a place where there's more room for arguments in terms of trying to convince even the hardcore that we could dream bigger than social democracy. And this is one of the reasons that I like Richard Wolff's work so much, when he talked, his emphasis on real life worker cooperatives, I think is a really useful way of nudging open people's imaginations a little bit, because it gets them to take seriously the idea that you talk about, we want to have a different economic system, we could have workers control the means of production, and I think a lot of people, even who have very left-wing sympathies, right, who are let's say socialism curious, kind of hear that and they're like yeah, whatever, right? I mean, you're clearly just describing some sort of millenarian fantasy that's not really going to happen. Whereas I think if you could point to but really, Mondragon exists, it has 100,000 members, and and it's a really successful model that could be very useful there. But then I think you're talking about how a lot of people in the hardcore are very geographically scattered, so they can't get together for even a protest. But I think that speaks to why we need to do both, right? I think we need to sort of try to shore up the hardcore to have a unifying vision that makes sense to us. but we also need to, frankly, spend a lot less time overall with the hardcore. That we need to spend more time doing local things, like Eric Levitz is a writer for New York Magazine and is sort of is sort of on the is a socialist, but somebody who's kind of in the sort of liberal wonk zone in terms of his presentation. When I talked to him about this after the election, and he said, he even used this phrase, like playfully, but I mean, like he's trying to get something across. States' rights progressivism is like is like the path forward, and I totally know what he means, which is that, I mean, think about like how Canada got Medicare for all. That it happened on the provincial level before it happened federally, and so I think anything that we can do to have like state level maybe. Or even local level. First, I mean, obviously can't do that for Medicare, but like for some kinds of things, for some kind of provisioning of social democratic programs, I think is incredibly useful to focus on, because I think it helps to chip away at that deep kind of capitalist realism and cynicism about the idea that we can do anything. If we could say, hey, look, like California already does X, Y, and Z. Right, I think that could help a lot of people to see X, Y, and Z as like realistic social democratic agenda items that we could have in the real world, or even in terms of more radical horizons. I like Greg Belvedere wrote an article for Current Affairs talking about how the idea that like when some like companies are going bankrupt, that that you could have like a crowdfunding thing to try to reopen them as worker co-ops, and I think that's a useful idea. Not because I'm under any illusions that there's any amount of that that would dislodge the sort of capitalist stranglehold on the commanding heights of the economy, but because I think it would be incredibly useful if, instead of having to tell, when we talk about, we could have democracy in the workplace, instead of having to tell people about Mondragon, where they're first, which means that first you're gonna have to tell them what the Basque region of Spain is, because they've never heard of it. That you can say, hey, that store down the street, that already works this way. I think that would be, very helpful. And I guess the last thought about this is just that, like, everything I'm saying right now is stuff that I think would be helpful, and I think are things that we should do, because anything that we can do to to kind of help with this problem is something that we should do. But I also think that to a certain extent, I don't think the point should be exaggerated, because exaggerating it can lead to a lot of like cynicism and nihilism. But to a certain extent, I think we also need to be grounded about the limits on our ability to control the situation, that we have, like, some of what needs to change is going to have to come from things that can't be really predicted or controlled by the left. That I think that you need to have. I think that you're going to have changes in the objective terrain of class struggle that open up different possibilities, and we don't always know what that looks like in advance, never mind being able to will it into existence. So I think that if you think about like what's happened in the past in some cases, with sort of outbreaks of, well, I mean, even in the recent history of the United States, like the last few years, like the red state teacher strikes, like I think that's like a small sign of something that, if it happened on a much bigger scale, could really change the ball game and create a lot more openings for us. But I mean, I think that it is useful having a little bit of a sense of perspective, because I do worry a little bit that Bernie Sanders in a lot of ways was supposed to be a shortcut, and that didn't work, and that now I think a lot of people are sort of searching for the next shortcut, and are even kind of thinking, okay, well, who's the guy who can run for president in 2024, who's going to make this happen for us. And I think that my concern about that is that I think people are going to burn out if they're totally focused on the idea of some sort of short-term breakthrough that it just might not be possible to will into existence. I think that things might change very quickly in our direction, and we certainly shouldn't rule that out. But I also don't think that you can count on it. We might be in for a very long haul here.
Well, that's important. Yeah, I mean, sorry, Adam, again, but I mean, there's the burnout, and then there's the kind of like frustration, and the kind of, I suppose this is kind of derogatory, but yeah, it's very derogatory, but throwing the toys out of the pram kind of attitude when things aren't going our way. You do see this an awful lot of like, well, if we can't have Sanders, can we just have full communism now? Which of course just isn't manageable. And the kind of rhetoric online from, okay, we'll say tankies, it's simplification, but people who urge kind of violent revolution, which isn't really getting us anywhere, and it's not really even particularly useful in debate online. So yeah, I mean, it's very important to emphasize, I think, that these things can take time, and to have people who kind of lead by example and remain fairly calm and can kind of, construe a logical kind of vision of what's going on. I mean, I get quite frustrated with online culture, although I'm kind of quite embedded in it. But I really do think that somehow we're kind of making it appear that something's happening. We can all talk, we can share memes and whatnot, make YouTube videos and Twitch streams, but there's almost a risk that that's convincing us we're doing something, and actually we're in reality like taking some of the best minds and also the not so bright minds of our generation and the younger generations who might be on the streets and confining them to their bedrooms where they play online instead. So yeah, I'm kind of a little bit conflicted there, and I wonder what we can do in terms of like kind of like coaxing these people to go and join their local groups, to join the local soup kitchen or the local I don't know what it would be, the Democrats or the what do you call the DN, the further left of them, or the left kind of
the DSA.
DSA, sorry, yeah, the DSA. The DSA sort of crosses over with the Democrats, the left Democrats. I don't know how it works, but to join with these people in your locality, wherever you're here, the Left Alliance, or in the UK, the left of the Labour Party, or whatever, or something more left than that. Go and do stuff, get out there, talk with people, because people are scared to talk to the actual working class, or even other actual working class people aside from themselves. People are scared often to talk to people. And I think we're dealing with a lot of people online who might interact with us and our content who, are kind of like scared and stuck in their bedroom, and then may say, yeah, but I don't want to go and make a community. Marx said communism would happen anyway, or some kind of, some such argument. And you really think, well, I think you're like alienated and you need to get out of your bedroom anyway. So just get out. You want to drag them out. But then, of course, I feel a little bit, condescending. Like, is it our place? Also, because we're kind of boomers anyway by now, is it our place to be telling these kids to go out and, play with people in a nice way? I don't know. I mean, any kind of final ideas, because I think we will have to wrap up, on how we might like appeal to the youth to,
I got a question that ties into that real fast, Ben, because it's a short one and it's a little bit silly. But I don't know if either of you have come across this meme of super capitalism. And it's the controversial YouTuber Vosh that I believe Ben has had a debate with. And he put out this idea, but I've seen it spread people beyond followers of his even talking about it. And it relates to this idea of, well, a lot of people would agree to Medicare for all if worded correctly, is that basically you could trick America into market socialism by running on a platform of super capitalism where you decommodify everything except luxury goods, and everyone gets to become an owner and a businessman. So if we could get a quick comment on that, and then
yeah, I mean, I think I think that Vosh is right about some things, wrong about other things, but I think that when I find myself a little frustrated with some of his commentary, sometimes it's because it just sometimes he strikes me as like a creature that is like purely the result of YouTube. That like that could almost have been like spontaneously generated by YouTube. And so I guess, which is part of why he appeals to so many people, but it's also, again, I think sometimes there's a very closed circle there, and that goes back, so yeah, I mean, like, that's funny. I mean, I don't know what to, what else to say about that, but I mean, like, I think that goes back to Mike's question about, what you can do as, whatever. I mean, yeah, I guess I'm, I was born in 1980, which puts me in the gray area between Gen X and millennials, but which might as well make me a member of the greatest generation as far as a lot of the people that we're talking about, online. So I think I think that it is important not to be condescending about this, and also not to be too too hypocritical about this, right? Because I mean, God knows, right? I mean, like, I have, as much as I have tried at various points to put my to be involved in meat space organizing in various ways, and union activities and campaigning for Bernie and whatnot. I mean, clearly 95% of what I do is writing things and talking to cameras, and so I think that I'm probably a very bad messenger for scolding everybody for for spending too much time reading things and watching videos. But I think that what we can do is be very, very clear about the distinction between what we do, and I don't mean what we do in a total sense. I mean, even I try to do things out in the real world. I'm certainly not saying you guys don't. I know, Mike, and you're involved in electoral efforts, but between what we do to the extent that we're doing this, what we do right now, and politics, because that's a distinction that, like, I mean, not to open this can of worms in the last 90 seconds of the conversation, but I mean, that's one of the things that really frustrated me about the whole force the vote spectacle, that I think this distinction was really lost on a lot of people, the distinction between politics and talking about politics. That those are not at all the same thing. That talking about politics, which is what you do on YouTube, can serve politics in various ways. It can be at its best. It can be useful to people actually doing politics, certainly in terms of political education and inspiration, entertainment, God knows, and perhaps even ideological and strategic clarification, all of which are very useful support systems for people actually engaged in political activity. But they don't exactly themselves add up to political activity. There's something that's helpful to people doing politics. They're not doing politics. So actually, leaving, logging off and going, and I realize also a lot of these things are complicated by the pandemic, but going to even going to a DSA meeting, or better yet, going along with people you meet at that meeting to do like door-to-door canvassing, for Medicare for All, to help organize a union at your workplace, to recruit candidates and then campaign for them, and primary challenges against centrist Democrats, to be involved in various forms of street level activism. Like, these are actually doing politics. This is just talking about politics. And I think there's a way to say that I hope isn't condescending. It isn't like scolding anybody or lecturing anybody about how they spend their time. It's just saying like, centrist Democrat voice, right? Let me be clear, that this isn't changing the world. This is performing all sorts of auxiliary functions that might help people going, help keep people going and changing the world, that might help them, get clearer on how they want to change it and how they might accomplish that. That might, all good things, right? But just a fundamentally different thing, right? So, and the one can even lead to the other. I think there are plenty of people who went out and knocked on doors for Bernie, who were somewhat activated to do that by the guys on Chapo's Trap House telling them to. So it's not that they're hermetically sealed off from each other, but they're different. And I think that you can say, like, I don't think that, obviously the harangue is not the most useful or motivating, way to get people to do anything, which is also a lesson that I think is very often lost on the left. But I think that without haranguing anybody, right, I think that just by talking about that distinction and being as clear as we possibly can about it, and using whatever sort of platform that we have to put a spotlight on things that people are doing in the real world, then I think all of those things can, contribute somewhat to what Mike is talking about in terms of, getting people to log off and actually do politics. Although, much like the lesson with the larger left, I think it is also important, even with us, to be very clear on what is and isn't under our control. We're not, we shouldn't be voluntarist about it, right? That, like, oh, if only we, like, yelled at people hard enough, to go log off and, do DSA things and do union and do electoral things and do, tenant organizing things, then there would be some mass wave of people doing it. That I don't think most people, even most leftists, are going to primarily base their decisions about things like that on what somebody tells them to do, on YouTube. I think that as things open up and they see possibilities for doing that kind of work that seem meaningful to them and seem like they might bear fruit, more people will be involved in them, right? So I think there are things that we can do to help, but I don't think that we can will it into existence. That, like, some of that is going to just have to, most of that is going to have to happen from the ground up, and then then we can use our various platforms to try to encourage people to be involved and to lead by example where possible.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's a good answer. I mean, also there's the thing the other way around, where many activists don't really trust the online left. So I mean, we could always maybe make them trust us, or rather, lead them to trust us and get them on our platforms, and then they could tell people maybe how to get involved.
Yeah, for sure.
As activists. Okay, so thank you, Ben. I think we will have to finish here. You have to get off. I think you have broadcast today. So your book's coming out April the 30th, Cancelling Comedians While the World Burns, a critique of the contemporary left. So I'll be looking forward to that. I haven't read it yet. I mean, it's not out, but I can I can get the PDF, I think, from the back end of Zero Books, but I haven't done that. I'm going to actually wait for it to come out. I'd like to read books in the book form.
Yeah, I actually got an email from Amazon today recommending that I read it, which I thought was a success.
Yeah, it's always good to know that the algorithms are really working.
They don't have total control yet.
That's right.
Yeah. Or they're just trying to wind us up. Because that works. Because now Ben said that. That's kind of funny. Maybe someone's going to now look up his book. We wouldn't otherwise. I don't know how that works. I sometimes think that because I keep getting told to read the Communist Manifesto, and it's like, come on. If I hadn't read the Communist Manifesto by now, and you think Amazon must know something of what I do. If I haven't read it, then who am I? But then I tell people that, and I think, well, yeah, hang on. But now I'm talking about it, so you can still get them a sale. But who knows how they work?
Thank you for coming on,
yes. Ben. Do look up Ben's book. Maybe not on Amazon. Find it somewhere.
Yeah, you can buy. You can buy the previous book or pre-order the new one at Red Emma's, which is a worker-owned bookstore in Baltimore that you can order from online. So that's redamas.org if you're looking for a non-Amazon place to buy it, at least within the United States. That would be my recommendation. But yeah, thanks for having me on, guys.
Yep. Cheers then. Okay. Bye-bye.